All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. It is an exciting time in the world of workforce as we get ready to look at where federal funds are headed for workforce development. I have just returned from the National Association of Workforce Boards conference in Las Vegas. So if you see a little bit of jet lag on, I got in late last night, but we had a busy week talking about where the direction of the public workforce system is going and getting a little bit of a preview of what's coming up this next year as Congress moves on to FY27 appropriations. So there are some fresh updates to the deck today. So we're going to go through and try to help everybody understand really what the process is of how the dollars get from really the starting point with the executive branch and how it works its way through Congress to actually be spent by us locally. And then we will sort of cover what's on the horizon, where some opportunities are, and make sure that everybody understands how these dollars actually operate at the local level. So whether you're a provider with an educational lens that you're doing some of the training, if you're doing wraparound support, if you're just partnering in some other way with the public workforce system, you get a little bit better sense of where these dollars are moving and how they operate. So you have better insight into how you can strategize to really make use of them. So with that, we're going to jump in. And like I said, we'll try to save some time at the end for questions and discussion of all this great information. So we're going to start at the beginning with really how these dollars flow from DC all the way down to be spent local level. So if you remember your Schoolhouse Rock, your high school civics class, everything starts with the president's budget. So each year, the chief executive forms his budget based off of administrative priorities and the types of programs that his administration wants to see. And so the president takes that budget and sends it to Congress for review. Now, 9 times out of 10, Congress is going to take that budget and they're going to use it as a doorstop and they're going to write their own budget because the Constitution puts the power of the purse in with Congress. They are the ones that actually get to decide how our tax dollars are appropriated and where they are spent. So typically the House is going to write their own. The current House has been very deferential to the president's budget. And when they release theirs, it's going to look very similar to what the president has requested. But as a whole, the Senate has been writing their own budget. And when they start to get together, the Senate has tended to win out these last few years. So once Congress gets it, it really starts in the committee. So each committee in both the House and Senate is going to draft their own budget of what is going to fund all of the departments that are within their purview. And then once that is done, it gets rolled up from the committee in each chamber up to that chamber's appropriations committee, and then ultimately onto the floor for a vote. And that's where you get an actual appropriations bill from. Typically, they're going to try to package these together in what's called an omnibus bill, where they put all 12 funding bills together and try to vote on them as one. Lately, we have seen that is not how it works. And so they have tried to package fewer appropriations bills together in what's called a minibus to try to get some of those through in little chunks. Once those appropriations have been passed and the House and the Senate both agree on it, that's when we can actually send down the funding to the local level. We should note that all of those funds, regardless of what appropriations bill they are attached to or what agency they're coming from, are all going to adhere to what's called 2 CFR 200. So this is the Uniform Administrative Grant Guidance, and it's going to govern how all of the funds work, what you can spend them on, how you have to report on them, and how all of it works. So looking specifically at our Title I WIOA funds, the adult and youth dollars are set out in the WIOA law, how those dollars are actually prescribed from Congress to be split up amongst all 50 states and territories. So adult and youth follow a 33-33-33 formula. So 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for the total pot that Congress is going to authorize is what gets split up based on these factors. So it's going to be 1/3 based off of your area of substantial unemployment, 1/3 based off of excess unemployment, and 1/3 on your disadvantaged individuals. So areas of substantial unemployment, or ASUs, there is a definition for what this is. And so that is areas where the unemployment level is greater than 6.5%. And so this is driven by data, it's defined by the state and sent up to Congress every year. Excess unemployment is going to be anything above 4.5%. And then the disadvantaged individuals, you're looking at either the poverty level or what's called the lower living standard income level, which is a mouthful, the LLSIL that we also use when we're determining eligibility for WIOA funds. Now, what you may notice here is that Georgia's unemployment rate is currently in the 3% range, and it has been for quite some time. We have not been above this 4%. Even since you go back to 2020, when we saw that sort of spike in the early days of the pandemic, Georgia has tended to remain in the 3% unemployment mark. So, what does that mean? Well, when you start to weigh our first factor of areas of substantial unemployment, we don't have that many ASUs that qualify for this. Similarly, if our unemployment rate statewide is in the threes, we're not going to be considered to have excess unemployment. So we lose a significant factor in both of those when you look at the other states. And so this is what is really driving the decline in Georgia's money, is that our unemployment rate is far outpacing the national average. And so as that goes, our share of what Congress authorized is also going to go down because it's tied to that formula with unemployment. Dislocated workers work much the same way, that it's a one third, one third, one third formula. We just sort of swap out what they are. The first third is your total unemployment. So we do get credit for that with our unemployment rate. The second is this same excess unemployment of everything above 4.5%. And then your final third is going to be long-term unemployed. So these are individuals who may be disconnected from the workforce. They've extended their unemployment benefits, but are still unemployed. They're not in a job working. And so that long-term unemployed, we would get credit for as well. And so you see this with dislocated worker, we do get the largest chunk in the state of Georgia from that dislocated worker pot. So that's the first step. It gets broken up by state based off of those one third, one third, one third formula, and it flows down to the state, where the state is then going to use the same sort of one third, one third, one third to break it up into each of the local workforce areas around the state. Before they do that, though, they're going to take off a portion of the state's allocation for state administration. So in adult and youth money, the state is going to take off 15% of that total allocation, and they're going to set it aside for the state to utilize. In dislocated worker, they're going to take that 15%, and then they're going to take another 25% for what is called rapid response. So this is how we respond when there are significant layoff events around the state. That rapid response activity is funded out of that 25% that the state sets aside. So you look at what the state gets as a whole, and then you see in each of those three buckets, the local areas are only getting a portion of what's going in there. So significant to note that the state has some to set aside to operate with, but not all of it flows down to the local areas to actually be spent on participant expenses. One thing that we often talk about that works a little different in terms of how the money gets to the local area or to the actual participants is going to be SNAP employment and training dollars. So these dollars do not come from the U.S. Department of Labor. They come from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So as we're tracking appropriations bills in the upcoming Congress, we're going to be looking at two different agencies. We're going to look at Health and Human Services for Department of Labor dollars, and we're going to track USDA for the SNAP dollars to see how that progresses through those agencies and through that committee to be put into an appropriations bill. So with SNAP ENT, so the employment and training is sort of a subset of the general state's SNAP funding. But for the employment and training, there's really two different types of funding in that budget. There's 100% funds, and so these are really based off of the state's share of SNAP work registrants. So again, data that the state is reporting up to the USDA. And then 10% of that is driven by what's called an ABOD. So that's an adult, an able-bodied adult without dependent. So these are basically the individuals that really should not have any barriers to participating in the labor force. And so based off of whatever the enrollments are of those two numbers determines what the state gets in 100% funds. And so those are essentially funds that do not require any sort of a local match and completely go towards the administration of SNAP programs. The other thing that the state can have access to is what's called 50/50 funds. And so this is where you start, you actually have to, as a provider or a workforce entity, spend a non-federal dollar. And then once you spend it, you submit that cost to the state, and the state can reimburse 50% of that cost out of this SNAP ENT bucket. What you get back in that reimbursement is totally unrestricted. You can do it for whatever you want. A lot of times the entities that are using the 50/50 dollars just reinvest it back into the system. So if you spent $100 of your money and you submit that reimbursement up to the state will reimburse $50. You can take that $50, spend it again, send it back up to the state and get $25 back. And so you just can continue to invest in your programs using that money because it is unrestricted once it gets to you as a reimbursement. And then the state, what they're able to do is take those and go back and access additional 50/50 dollars. So it's not limited each year. They do write into the state plan what they anticipate would be spending in 50/50 funds, but the state really is able to go back and get more money. So there's more sitting there than what is available basically in WIOA dollars that has not already been allocated to a local area, to a state set aside or something like that. So those SNAP ENT dollars do represent a really untapped resource here in the state that we are working to make advantage of. So that is all the available dollars every year that sort of makes up the largest portions of federal workforce dollars that we spend in Georgia. So again, sort of hot off of the press, we can look at where things stand now and really what we're looking at with these federal trends. So if we back up to formula or fiscal year 25, we had a continuing resolution that was passed essentially for flat funding across the board. We did have reauthorization for WIOA written into an appropriations bill. It was known as a Stronger Workforce for America Act. And it was in the appropriations bill. If you think back and you remember early December, Congress had an appropriations bill ready to go. It was working its way through. And in the middle of the night, the entire thing was blown up by some activity on Twitter. That some individuals didn't like what the appropriations bill looked like, and so they threw it away and ultimately wound up with just a continuing resolution. So we really had uncertainty a lot of that year of what that was going to mean for us because reauthorization was right there almost across the finish line. So we fast forward to this last fiscal year, and this is when we had a shutdown. If everybody remembers back in February, the longest shutdown in history, as we tried to figure out how we were going to fund 9 of the 12 appropriations bills that needed to be passed through Congress. Notably, we are still in one sort of shutdown with Homeland Security. If you've seen the airport in the last week or so, you understand what I'm talking about with that. But everything else was passed through a minibus earlier in February. In this new sort of appropriations, it really was flat funding. Somewhat of a continuing resolution that kicked the can down the road to September. Our funding for WIOA was funded again through September 30th, but we're still sort of in this fight of what appropriations looks like. And that's what gets us really to what we anticipate will kick up here in the next week or so with FY27 funding. We are anticipating sometime in the next 2 weeks that the president will release his 27 budget. We anticipate that it will look very similar to his 26 budget, which means he will be calling for the Make America Skilled Again Act, which would be a significant cut to our workforce programs. We are kind of the discussion we had this week with our national association was that we anticipate that the House is going to pick up with the Stronger Workforce for America Act, or ASWA, and really start there. I'll note that when it was originally in that appropriations bill in 25, it was bipartisan and bicameral. So both Republicans and Democrats in both the House and Senate were in favor of that bill moving forward. We anticipate that when the committee comes back and starts taking up sort of a reauthorization bill in the House, that it will be partisan and that it will be Republicans driving the ship. They'll start with ASWA and probably pull in some of these recommendations or priorities that are in Make America Skilled Again and try to get a bill through that way that has what that language looks like. So we're going to be monitoring that very closely to see what kind of an impact that it has. Again, we can kind of break it down here so that everybody understands. If you haven't seen what these different legislations look like, I've broken it down here for you. Sort of hit the highlights of what it is. The Make America Skilled Again, the president's sort of preference is a pretty tremendous change for the workforce system. It would eliminate about 11 different programs and consolidate it into one block grant that comes down to the state. So what does that mean? That means that several programs are going to be eliminated entirely. It would probably eliminate the role of the local board, and it would give the money entirely to the governor to distribute and figure out how that money gets spent locally. So a pretty significant change, really moves everything up to the state level and takes away the ability for the local community to really drive how workforce programs are delivered. Similarly, the Stronger Workforce for America Act has some significant changes. It does retain all three sort of buckets in addition to the other programs. So you keep your adult dislocated worker youth budget. It keeps the funding formula. It keeps local areas as really being the driver of workforce programs. But it does make some other changes. So what we are really looking at that is in terms of this governance area. There is a provision that would sort of change the definition of what a local board is and change that geography. Currently, a local area can sort of self-designate if they have a population of a certain size. The new outline that is currently in ASWA would change that the boundary of a workforce board would align with an economic region or a labor shed. So really, when you're thinking about like Metro Atlanta, we have one labor shed that covers the 10 counties as opposed to 5 workforce boards now. So the language that's currently in there for governance would have an impact on the structure of our local boards in the metro region. Similarly, like you were saying, in the Make America Skilled Again, it's a significant cut and consolidation of programs. That block grant, typically you see, tends to favor urban areas over rural areas, but it also tends to make it a lot easier to cut that funding. So we'll be watching very closely to see which one of these sort of gains favor as the House Republicans start to advance that reauthorization bill. And to give some numbers of where we're at, again, I promise it's going to get sunny at some point. But the trend, really, why we need to be paying attention to this is that the trends for Georgia and for the metro region have been pretty stark. That funding nationally for workforce programs has really seen a slight increase, but Georgia has been taking a hit year over year. Here you've got the last 5 years, you can sort of see that change. But we like to highlight that for the Atlanta Regional Workforce Board, in the last 10 years, we've seen a 46% reduction in our funding. So you're almost at half of the money here in 2026 that we had 10 years ago. Meanwhile, we have seen significant job growth and significant population increase in the region. So we're really trending in opposite directions of a greater need than we've ever had and fewer resources than we've ever had. So it's really this diverging trend that we're dealing with in the South. And to put that on a chart, you can see since 2016, really the federal funding, that's going to be your green line, has gone up. It is 7% nationally over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, the Georgia's share kind of peaked there during the pandemic in 2020 and then has significantly fallen off since then. We sort of talk as you think history of workforce dollars and WIOA. When WIOA first came into law in 2014, the state's share was about $90 million. So similar trend there that the state of Georgia was at 90 million back in 2014 and is down to just about 55 million this most recent year. So a similar 40-50% cut statewide. It shouldn't be a surprise when you think about what that funding formula looks like as who's been gaining and who's been losing. States with the higher unemployment have been getting a significant increase in their formula. You look that time frame there, the state of Illinois has gained almost entirely what the state of Georgia has lost. You see Alabama and some of our other southern states are starting to feel the impact of these cuts because, again, the Sun Belt has really been driving employment for the country and had low unemployment. And you've seen some of these other states really start to see their unemployment tick up. And so they are getting a larger share of that pot. So what does that mean for us locally? It's more important now than ever to understand how this money moves through the system and what it takes to ultimately get to us as local boards and local providers that are receiving these dollars in partnership with the workforce system. All of your money, this has to flow through and start with one of the local workforce boards if you're using WIOA funding. The state of Georgia does have a state code that requires that this money go to either a city, a county, or a regional commission. So again, you ask, why are you working with a certain county body or why are you working with the city? It's because the state requires that they be the owners and operators of that money. That is significant for you to understand that you're going to follow whatever that fiscal agent's requirements are to be a custodian of that money. So how they do procurement, how they do purchasing, the contracts, what their invoicing requirements are, all determine how you can have access to that funding or what you need to do to make sure that you're aware of what those opportunities are to partner with that fiscal agent. It also sort of manages their cash flow. So I think that's one of the number one questions we get as workforce boards is, when do we have money available? Are we on a wait list? When do we expect to get more? A lot of that is driven by the structure of the fiscal agent. So some fiscal agents do a reimbursement model where they will spend sort of their general dollars and then go and draw down the money from TCSG, from the state, and reimburse the money that they spend. But some of them do it on an accrual basis, which means that they are essentially drawing the money down as they spend it. The difference there really is going to be how quickly you may get paid if you are working with one of these, because it's the ability of them to have that cash flow to be able to process your invoice. If there are any delays at the state level, so for instance, if there is a federal shutdown, some entities can continue to float the cash and carry those invoices knowing that they're on a reimbursement model and can get that cash back. If they're on an accrual model where the system shuts down and they don't have the ability to draw cash down, they're not going to be able to process invoices. So it's important that you understand how that fiscal agent operates if you are operating with a contractor receiving any of those funds from that entity. That also, the way that the fiscal agent works determines sort of how they're managing that money that comes down. So the WIOA money comes down in basically a 2-year cycle. So every time you get it, you have 2 years to spend it. Some workforce boards spend it as soon as it comes in. They never make it to year 2 with that money. Particularly money that's attached to youth usually gets spent within the first year that it's received. Some boards do a pretty good job of carrying over. So they're really only ever spending the money that is set to expire. Again, that sort of determines when in the year they have funding available. So if you're looking to enroll participants with ITAs, if you're looking for other contracts to partner with them to provide direct services, when that money becomes available is very important for you to know when you're going to have access to it. So again, it's all depending on what they spend in the first year and what they may carry over into year two and how much is available. That fiscal agent is also going to be setting some of the funding limits in terms of how much they can spend before it's got to go out to procurement, how much they can spend before it's got to be approved up several levels of administrative approval, just based off of how much money it is. So, understanding that for the WIOA portion is really important for us to start thinking about how do we diversify where our funding is coming from. If you are a frontline provider, it becomes very important for you to understand what those rules are based off of whatever funding streams you have. So, if you have WIOA money, if you're getting money from TANF or SNAP, or you're getting GVRA money, understanding the cycle for each of those and how you can make access to them. What we often see is that you as a provider have the flexibility to take these different funding sources and really braid them together to deliver the program. So we've given here really an example of braiding funding based off of a cohort. So if you have one class with 10 seats, how do you split that up based off of where you're going to fund based on your different revenue streams? So you can see how you can take different pieces of money and fund one individual with an ITA from WIOA money. You can fund another out of SNAP ENT money. You might have somebody that has veterans benefits or from a community development block grant, and piece those together to fill your one class or your one system. You can also do this around an individual. So you can cover the occupational skills training with your ITA. You can cover wraparound services with something like SNAP ENT, and package these same funding sources around the individual as opposed to around the cohort. Either way, you've got to understand what that flow looks like and what the cycle is to be sure that you're able to sort of get all of your funding for that one cohort or for that one participant and understand the cycle of that money. So we will sort of jump ahead here to really wrap it up and sort of bring us into discussion and any questions. I think the big takeaway is that, we are seeing a decline, particularly in WIOA money here in the state. And we do have some uncertainty as we head into appropriations for FY27 about what the future state of the public workforce system may look like. I think the important thing for us as a region to understand is that there is funding out there. We just need to make sure that we are set up as a system and as partners to go together to get those opportunities. You will see money for apprenticeships. You will see money for SNAP ENT. You will see other discretionary grants come down. And the better aligned we are as partners and as a region, the better equipped we will be to get that funding into the region to be able to serve the job seekers that we have. It's also important that everybody in the system understands the implications of all of this, that understands where the money is coming from, when it's available, how it can be spent, because that ultimately is what is going to drive our programs, is the availability of that money and the ability to get it expediently into the front lines where it needs to be spent. So really critical that everybody keeps tabs of this. Again, we're going to be watching it here over the next few weeks to see how it develops. And as it comes, we, of course, will bring it back to the max body. But I think that was the message this week at the National Association of Workforce Boards, is that we really need to be prepared to be pivoting as a system to make advantage of all of this, but also make sure that we're telling our story of what this means on the front line, what we're able to do with this money, and the importance of our partnership in delivering it. So I'll wrap it up there. Chris, turn it over to you. If we've got any questions or anybody wants to discuss any of this further, I'm happy to yield to those questions.
Yep, that's perfect. All right. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Brett? That was a great conversation. Let's see. Any questions? Oh, yes. Monty raised your hand. Monty, if you want to share your question in the chat, we can ask Brett. And Joseph, yeah, same thing, Joseph. If you have a question, please just type it in the chat. Okay, Brett from Marshall Wood, if WIOA funds are reduced in Georgia, what other money should we be focusing on?
It's kind of the million-dollar question. Uh, there's a couple of other sources that are readily available. We are really excited if you thinking more closely to the ground. The state legislature just passed House Bill 1302. This was the final piece of really Governor Kemp's education and workforce strategy. So it's known as the Education and Workforce Strategy Act. It does a lot of things to align our systems at the state level. But one big piece of this final bill is apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship dollars. So we are seeing that as a tool that is becoming very critical to the workforce system. It is a tool that is included both in a stronger workforce for America and Make America Skilled Again. So there is funding available both at the state and federal level to be rolling out apprenticeship partnerships. That is one source. Obviously, looking at things like SNAP ENT, looking at VR money, looking at other existing federal appropriations that are already in the state is another source. And then there's the opportunity, as always, to go for philanthropic dollars. If you've got any relationships there are several philanthropy groups that are looking to invest in this work. They just need the right story and the right partner to partner with.
Perfect. Joy, I see in the chat that you were gonna unmute Robert. Do you want to go ahead and do that for his question? Oh, I see your message. Let me see if there's a way for me to do that.
Mhm.
We might have, let's see, Robert. Okay. Robert, if you, oh no, I think I unmuted the wrong Robert. Okay, hold on.
Chris, you want me to
Okay.
tackle Monty's question while you're trying to
Well,
unmute him?
I think Robert Joseph, you should be ready to go.
Yes, thank you, Robert Joseph, Team Mindshift. Brett, thank you for doing
Mhm.
this. I've heard this this presentation several times, and I get more and more out of it each time.
Mhm.
Um, my question is around the apprenticeship program.
Mhm.
How has that changed over time? And if it was there and I missed it, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to make sense of all this.
No, I think that's a good question. I think it's one that we as a state and as a region are really trying to take advantage of. We're really leaning on those partners that we have that have a long history of apprenticeship to really show us the way and give us all of their secrets. You're starting to see that shift that the state of Georgia is investing in it. They have become the state apprenticeship administrator, so they've brought everything more closely to the state from the federal level. They are also rolling out now pay for performance contracts for apprenticeship. So again, the funding mechanism for apprenticeship, they're really investing into demonstrated success and demonstrated performance. So we are trying to grapple with that as workforce boards, as providers, as to what our role is and how we can help connect employers with that system so that we can really drive that process. But it is one where funding is going to be trickling out and becoming more and more available on the state level now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All righty, we have another question from Abioduni Martin. It's how much funds are available for the emerging trade programs such as solar?
I'm not actually familiar with that emerging trades program as much. We may need to go look into that and send it out with the slide deck.
Okay. And then Monty Green asked, is there any strategy underway regarding the unemployment numbers in Georgia that will allow us to better target the unemployment rates for the constituents that we support? Clearly, their rate isn't 3%.
Yeah, Monty, I think that's a valid question. It's sort of a multi-pronged approach because We know that Georgia's unemployment rate is reported at 3%. So again, this is where they're looking at what's known as the U3 unemployment. That's what gets reported, and it is essentially only those individuals who are currently on unemployment benefits. Those individuals who have exhausted their unemployment or are no longer sort of actively participating in the labor force, those that have been disconnected aren't being counted in that number. That's more of our U6 unemployment rate. So you think about how Georgia's labor force participation rate is only at like 62%. You've got 30-40% of our available workforce that's not even being considered for this. It's one of the reasons that we've been working with our representatives and our senators to get this funding formula changed. This formula has been around since JTPA, so it's about 40, 50 years old, and has not been updated despite significant changes in what the labor force looks like. Because that formula hasn't changed, we can't change how they're counting who is considered unemployed and who is not. So we understand that the functional unemployment in these communities is not 3%, but unfortunately, they're going to look at it in the aggregate based off of that model. So we are asking them to really revisit that as they look at reauthorization.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brett. All right. Are there any
Mhm.
other questions from the audience? Any other questions? Any other questions? Oh, yes. Okay. We just got one. So from Jahari Soward, you mentioned a few organizations and groups shaping the workforce
Mhm.
agenda. Can you shape who the employers, workforce partners, and training partners that we should be paying closest attention to? Um, can you share who the employers, workforce partners, and training partners that we should be paying closest attention to?
Yeah, in terms of just looking at groups that are really tracking this legislation and working to affect it, the National Skills Coalition is going to be a big one, as well as the National Association of Workforce Boards. I will throw in there, because I thought I saw her on here, the National Association of Workforce Development Professionals. Those are a couple of groups that really take a national voice of what this work looks like. Um, that is really who we go through, as well as really our chamber partners, making sure that they have the business voice in what we're doing, then ensuring that the employers are coming to the table, identifying what their talent needs are and how our system connects through that. Obviously, all politics is local, so we are definitely making sure that we're engaging with our representatives, and then both Senators Warnock and Ossoff's offices, to really help drive this agenda and make sure that they're aware of what the impact is in Georgia, where the need is in Georgia, and really where we are trying to innovate as a state to take those solutions and those suggestions to roll them out nationally.
Perfect. Okay. For unclaimed funds in Georgia, especially
Mhm.
those intended for nonprofits serving eligible clients,
Mhm.
how can organizations be better informed about these opportunities?
um, I think Max is the front answer there, is making sure you're plugged in with our communications and our channels. Again, a lot of this is one of those situations where it's really important for you to know the partners and have relationships with those partners so that you understand when there's funding opportunities available, when they may have resources that are not coming down from the federal government, those groups that may have philanthropic dollars that are looking for partners to help engage with those. Similarly, if there are discretionary grants that you're going after, there are a couple of those funding opportunities that are out there now for pay for performance for apprenticeships, for reentry programs, youth programs. It's really important to have that demonstrated partnership when you go after those. So, making sure that you're connected sort of with the network here locally is really important to be aware of where those resources are and how you can, make use of them.
Perfect. We had another question from Daniel. How do we get a more collaborative approach with the WIB
Mm-hmm.
plus employers plus training provider to change the systematic approach to move the numbers unemployment favorable?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Daniel. The workforce board is supposed to be that convener of all of these groups, and I think here the conversation we're having with Max is really meant to be the place for the facilitation of those conversations between providers and the private sector and the system itself. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer. I think that's why we see Atlanta's economic mobility number dead last in Raj Chetty's study. I think it's one that we are looking at solutions for and hope to have one. We are planning to visit Charlotte to figure out what they did to move from dead last up to 38th in those economic mobility rankings. But I think that's part of our structural issue in the region that is contributing to us being 50th out of 50 for economic mobility, is that we don't have the answer to move that unemployment number. That a lot of this is access and opportunity, and if our systems aren't in place to allow the individuals that are most in need of it to access those systems and be able to leverage those pathways to economic opportunity, we're not going to be able to move that number. So I think that's a good question. um, if you've got the answer, I think we would welcome it and be happy to implement it.
Yeah, that's the million dollar question.
Yeah, that's why we do what we do, right, Daniel?
Okay, do we have any other questions before we wrap up? Five.
Yeah,
Stop.
she wants the
Okay.
Raj Chetty study.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? Going up, going once, going twice. All, all righty. Thank you. Oh, okay. We just got one. What is Brett's advice for workforce partners?
What is my advice for workforce partners? Um, Make sure you have a relationship, particularly with those groups that do have some sort of a formula allocation. So whether that is your closest workforce board, whether that is a relationship with an entity that is, for instance, an intermediary or a third-party provider of like SNAP ENT funds, the closer you can get to that money coming down, is going to be the better equipped you are to understand how that money works, when it's available, and what you can do to leverage those resources to help the clients and the job seekers that you may be serving. I'm somewhat preaching to the choir, but partnerships, and partnerships, and just staying engaged here with Max is really the forefront of developing those partnerships and understanding who's trying to do what, who may have a good idea, and just maybe looking for that one last piece of the puzzle to be able to go after it.
That's perfect. Well, thank you again,
Mhm.
Brett, so much for your time. This has been a great presentation, so really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get back to the screen. So, all righty. Thank you everyone for joining this morning. We would love to hear from you through our annual survey. So I'll give you a minute if you have not filled out the survey to scan the screen now and to share your thoughts with us. And also, if you are not a member, this is your invitation to join Max. Here's another QR code. So if you've not joined Max, you can scan the QR code below to learn more. And if you have any questions, you can shoot Joy an email. Her email is found in the bottom right corner, but we'd love to have you with us. Upcoming with Max, we have our Max Academy event coming up on May 6th, and the theme for that event will be Mastering Apprenticeships and Pre-Apprenticeships. So we would love to have you all there. And finally, again, thank you to our supporters, our anchors. So we have WorkSource Georgia, the Georgia Department of Human Services, Metro Atlanta WorkSource Georgia, Goodwill of North Georgia, Metro Atlanta Chamber, BDI, Career Rise, Ferrovial, First Step Staffing, and Google. We could not do what we do without them. So thank you, thank you, thank you.